I still remember the exact second my mother's face changed. Not the kind of change you can miss. Not a small frown. Not a tired look. I mean the kind of silence that drops over a room when somebody has just been humiliated so deeply they do not even know what to say yet. My wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it became the day I learned the difference between people who love your money and people who love your presence. And once I saw that difference, I could never unsee it. My name is Avery, and this is the story of how the people who gladly took everything my mother offered still had the nerve to treat her like she didn't belong. It all started with money, not because my mother was rich. She wasn't. She worked for every dollar she ever earned. She cleaned houses for years, then worked in an office, then took on extra side jobs when she got older. She did all of that alone after my father left when I was 12. My mother, Linda, was the kind of woman who never complained. She would wake up before the sun, pack my lunch, drive me to school, work all day, and still come home with enough strength to ask me how my day went. She missed vacations, she missed new clothes, she missed meals sometimes so I could have seconds. And because of her, I grew up believing one thing for sure. Love is not always loud. Sometimes love is a woman sitting at a kitchen table at midnight counting bills and making sure her daughter has a future. When I got engaged to Ethan, I was happy. I really was. He was charming at first, polite, soft-spoken, the kind of man who looked like he had his life figured out. His family was the opposite of mine. They had money, not just comfortable money. Real money, country club money, fancy invitation money, linen tablecloth money. And from the very beginning, I could feel the difference. They smiled at my mother, but it never quite reached their eyes. They asked where she worked, how she was handling the planning, and whether she was comfortable with certain wedding choices. That word, comfortable, always felt insulting when they said it. Like they were asking whether my mother would survive being around them. At first, I ignored it. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I told myself maybe rich people just talked differently. But then the wedding planning started, and that is when my mother did what she always does. She carried me. The venue I wanted was expensive. The dress I wanted was expensive. The flowers, the photographer, the music, the cake, the shuttle buses, the plates, the chairs, the rehearsal dinner, the hair and makeup, the open bar, the bridal suite, everything was expensive. I had a budget, Ethan had a budget, his parents had opinions, but when the numbers started climbing, his family suddenly had something else to say. They said they were happy to contribute, but in that strange way people talk when they want to sound generous without actually being generous. Then, quietly, my mother stepped in. She told me not to worry. She said, "This is your wedding, baby. Don't stress. I'll help." And help she did. Not a little, a lot. She paid for the venue deposit when the timing got tight. She covered the photographer when the package price went up. She paid for my dress alterations. She paid for the flowers because I cried when I saw what they cost. She paid for the dessert table, the invitations, the extra chairs, and the wedding coordinator fee when someone made a mistake with the schedule. She even paid for part of the rehearsal dinner when Ethan's family suddenly forgot the final invoice was due. My mother never made a scene. She never said, "Look what I'm doing for you." She never asked for praise. She just kept reaching into her savings, her pension, her side income, and even the little emergency account she had spent years building. When I told her she was giving too much, she smiled and said, "You only get married once. I want it to be beautiful." That was my mother. That was Linda. She didn't see sacrifice as sacrifice. She saw it as love. And because of that, I thought everyone else would treat her with respect. I was wrong. So wrong. The first sign was the seating chart. We were all gathered in the living room at Ethan's parents' house. reviewing final wedding details. His mother, Catherine, sat here fright in a cream-colored chair like she was born in it. She had a perfect posture, pearl earrings, and the kind of face that looked kind only when she was being watched. His father barely spoke. He just nodded along with whatever she said. The wedding planner spread out the seating chart on the table. Catherine pointed with one manicured finger. "Immediate family in the front row, of course," she said. I smiled and nodded, thinking she meant my mother too. Then she kept going. Then the rest of the close family. Then friends, then all the staff handling the event. I blinked. "Staff?" I asked. She looked at me like I had interrupted something obvious. "Yes," she said smoothly. "The vendors, helpers, the people moving things around. We do not want confusion." My mother was sitting beside me, quiet, still, hands folded in her lap. I felt my stomach tighten because I knew exactly where this was going. I said, "My mother is not staff." Catherine gave a small smile that wasn't really a smile at all. "Of course not, dear. I'm just saying we should keep things organized." Then she looked toward my mother and added, in that same polished voice, "Linda, you'll probably be busy helping with the final touches, so we'll place you toward the back where you can come and go more easily." My mother looked at her and said nothing. I wish I could tell you she immediately stood up and defended herself. I wish I could tell you she slapped the table and walked out. But my mother didn't do that. She simply nodded once. Not because she agreed, because that was how she survived people like that. I could see it in her eyes, though. She was hurt, deeply hurt, but she swallowed it. And I did too, because I told myself again it was not worth creating drama before the wedding. That phrase is dangerous, by the way. Not worth creating drama. People use it to convince good people to stay quiet while they are being disrespected. A few days later, things got worse. We were at the final walkthrough at the venue, checking the aisle length and the table setup. My mother had paid the balance for the floral arrangements 2 days earlier. The wedding planner knew it. The venue manager knew it. I knew it. Catherine knew it too. And still, when my mother came in carrying a folder of receipts and final confirmations, Catherine looked over her shoulder and said, "Loud enough for people to hear. Oh, Linda, could you please stay near the service area? We're trying to keep the front of the house clear." Service area. I watched my mother stop walking. Just for a second. One tiny second. But I saw it. She heard exactly what she was called without being called anything at all. I said, "She's here for the wedding meeting." Catherine gave that same graceful smile. "I understand. We just need a little order." Then she turned to one of the waitstaff and said, "Please, show her where the back entrance is." The air left my body. Back entrance. My mother looked around the room like maybe she had misunderstood. Maybe they meant someone else. Maybe they would correct themselves. But no one corrected anything. My mother set the folder down on a nearby table, looked at me, and said softly, "Avery, it's okay." And that was somehow the saddest part, because she was the one being treated like she didn't matter. And she was still trying to comfort me. I wanted to explode right there. But before I could, Ethan touched my arm and whispered, "Babe, don't make this a thing. Mom is just being particular." Particular. That word. People say particular when they mean controlling. They say organized when they mean cold. They say tradition when they mean exclusion. And I think that day something inside me cracked a little, even though I still wasn't ready to admit it. The wedding day came with all the beauty I had imagined. The flowers were perfect. The music was soft and expensive. The guests looked stunning in their formal clothes. The cake was 3 stories tall and covered in white roses. Everyone kept saying the event looked like something out of a magazine. And my mother, My beautiful, exhausted, generous mother was in the hotel room helping me get ready while her hand shook just a little as she pinned my veil into place. She looked at me in the mirror and smiled. "You're going to be so beautiful," she said. I turned and hugged her, and for 1 second I almost forgot the ugliness. Almost. Then Catherine walked in. She glanced at my mother's dress, which was elegant but simple, and said, "Linda, once the ceremony starts, could you please stay near the back? We have very limited seating up front, and the front row is reserved for immediate family." My mother froze. I saw it happen in real time. Her fingers stopped moving. Her shoulders went still. Then she said in a quiet voice, "I am the bride's mother." Catherine's expression barely changed. "Yes, of course. But because of the layout, we need to keep the front row for the groom's side and the grandparents." The groom's side. Not the bride's mother. Not the woman who paid for half the wedding. Not the woman who gave up everything to make this day possible. Just the groom's side. I looked at Ethan, waiting for him to say something. He looked away, and that was worse than Catherine's words. Because Catherine was rude, but Ethan was supposed to be my husband. He was supposed to protect me, protect us. My mother looked at me again, and I could see she was trying so hard not to cry. She said, "Avery, it's your day. Don't worry about me." And that's when Catherine crossed the line completely. She turned to my mother, pointed toward the hallway, and said, "If you need to be near the catering team, they're set up just down there." The catering team. My mother stared at her like she had been slapped. And then Catherine added, almost casually, "You can pay, but you cannot sit in the front row. We need to be fair to the family." That sentence hit me like ice water. You can pay, but you cannot sit in the front row. Let me tell you something honestly. There are moments in life when you do not feel anger first. You feel clarity, sudden, brutal clarity. I looked at the table, at the flowers my mother paid for, at the dress she helped me buy, at the photographer she covered, at the wedding that only existed because of her. And I looked at that woman, Catherine, standing there like my mother was some worker she could order around. And I finally understood. They didn't respect us. Not me. Not my mother. Not our sacrifice. They wanted the beauty of what we gave them, but they did not want the dignity of giving us space. I walked over to my purse, opened it, pulled out my phone. Catherine looked confused. Ethan looked nervous. My mother whispered, "Avery, what are you doing?" I didn't answer right away, because once I started speaking, I knew there would be no going back. I opened the wedding app where all the payments were tracked. Every deposit, every final balance, every transfer. My mother's money. And I said, very calmly, "I'm done." Catherine laughed lightly, like she thought I was being dramatic. "Done with what?" I turned to her and said, "Done paying for people who think my mother is staff." The room went silent. Even the music from the hallway seemed far away. Ethan said, "Avery," but I held up my hand. "No, you don't get to speak right now." I looked at Catherine. "You told the woman who paid for this wedding that she can pay but not sit in the front row. You told her she should use the back entrance. You treated her like she was hired help. So here's what's going to happen now." I took a breath. Then I said, "My mother's money is being withdrawn from everything that can still be canceled. Right now." Catherine's face changed for the first time. Not into kindness, into panic. "What do you mean withdrawn?" "I mean exactly that," I said. "The photographer? Cancelled. The dessert table? Cancelled. The upgraded floral bill? Not happening. The extra reception lighting? Not happening. The shuttle balance? Not happening. The final catering overage? Not my problem." Ethan stepped forward. "You can't do that. The wedding starts in less than an hour." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I asked, Where was that urgency when your mother called my mother's staff? He opened his mouth, then closed it, because he had no answer. My mother touched my arm gently. Baby, she said, we don't have to do this. And I knew what she meant. She meant I didn't have to embarrass myself. I didn't have to ruin the day. I didn't have to make enemies. That's what good mothers do. They try to protect their children from the fallout of standing up for themselves. But this time, I wasn't doing it just for me. I was doing it for her. I turned to my mother and said, "No, Mom, we are doing this." Then I looked back at Catherine and said, "You wanted a wedding paid for by a woman you don't respect. That ends now." Catherine's voice sharpened. "This is outrageous. Do you know what this will cost us?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. She was worried about cost now. Now, not when my mother was paying. Now, when she was losing it. I said, "You should have thought about that before you tried to seat the woman funding this event beside the catering staff." The room was dead silent. Then I turned to the planner and said, "Please pull up every contract that still allows cancellation and stop anything that hasn't already been delivered." The planner hesitated. I repeated it, firmer this time. "Please do it." She nodded and went to work. Catherine looked at Ethan, as if he should save her, and he did the weakest thing possible. He said, "Avery, this is not the time." I stared at him, and I remember feeling something in me go very cold. Not angry, not emotional, just finished. I said, "Exactly. It was never the time for your family to respect my mother, was it?" No one spoke, because the answer was obvious. The wedding never happened the way they expected. Some things could not be cancelled in time. The ceremony itself had already been set. The venue was rented. A few vendors were paid in full and couldn't be stopped. So, the day went on, but the energy changed completely. It was no longer a celebration. It was a performance under a cloud. And let me tell you, once the money stopped flowing, the kindness stopped too. People who had been fawning over Catherine suddenly became polite to my mother. Suddenly, she was Mrs. Collins. Suddenly, they found her seat. Suddenly, they remembered she was the bride's mother. But it was too late. Because dignity, once you lose it, is not something you can ask someone to return at the front desk. My mother did not sit in the back. She sat in the front row, right where she belonged. Not because they allowed it, because I did. And because for the first time that day, I decided that my mother's love would not be repaid with humiliation. When I walked down the aisle, I was shaking. Not because I was nervous, because I knew I was about to build a life with a man whose family had already shown me who they were. And that truth is hard to ignore once it stands in front of you in a dress. The ceremony itself was stiff. Catherine looked furious. Ethan looked embarrassed. His father looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. But my mother sat up straight, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes wet but proud. And when I looked at her, I saw something I will never forget. Relief. Not because the wedding was going well, because she no longer had to beg to be treated like she mattered. After the ceremony, I did not stay for the full reception. That shocked people. But I was done pretending. I kissed the guests. I smiled for the photos. I thanked the people who deserved thanks. Then I took my mother's hand, walked out of that ballroom, and left the people who had spent months feeding on her generosity but refusing her respect. The drive home was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty. It feels earned. My mother kept staring out the window. Finally, she said, "I didn't want to ruin your wedding." And I reached over and held her hand. "You didn't ruin anything, Mom," I said. "They did." She looked at me then, and she started to cry. Not loud crying, just the kind that comes when a person has been strong for too long and finally feels safe enough to stop. I just wanted you to be happy, she said. I know, I told her. That's exactly why I did it. Because happiness is not a wedding. Happiness is not flowers or a cake or a ballroom full of people pretending. Happiness is knowing that the person who sacrificed for you is not standing in the back while everyone else gets the front row. A few days later, the messages started. Catherine called twice. Ethan called 6 times. His aunt sent a long text about family harmony and misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. That's another word people use when they want you to swallow disrespect and call it peace. Ethan said I'd overreacted. He said his mother was just trying to keep things organized. He said I embarrassed his family. I asked him one question. Did you ever once tell your mother she was wrong? He said nothing, and that told me everything. So I ended it, not in a dramatic screaming way, in a steady, final way. Because I was not going to marry a man who watched his mother degrade mine and decided silence was easier. The wedding photos were never posted by his family. Dubalt. Because the real story was not in the pictures anyway. The real story was in what happened when the mask came off. The real story was a mother who paid for a dream and got treated like a servant. The real story was a daughter who finally realized love without respect is just another form of theft. Months later, when people asked why I left, I told them the truth. I said, because my mother was good enough to fund the wedding, but not good enough for the front row. And I was not going to build my life inside a family that saw her that way. Some people looked shocked. Some people nodded because they understood. And my mother? She moved on. She got a little lighter. I could see it. She stopped apologizing for taking up space. She bought herself a nice dress for once. She started saying no more often. She laughed more. And sometimes, when I caught her looking at me, I knew she was proud, not because I had a wedding, but because I had finally learned to protect the people who protected me. That was the real ending. Not the canceled flowers. Not the angry in-laws. Not even the broken engagement. The real ending was this. My mother gave me everything she had. And when someone tried to reduce her to the help, I made sure they understood something they would never forget. You do not get to take a woman's money and spit on her dignity. You do not get to profit from her sacrifice and then humiliate her in public. And you absolutely do not get to tell a daughter that her mother belongs in the back when her heart and her money built the whole room. I will never forget the look on Catherine's face when I pulled the funding. A few weeks after the wedding, the silence finally became louder than the arguments had been. At first, everyone thought I would come around, that I would feel guilty, that I would apologize, that I would say, it was just one bad moment, and go back to being the easy girl who tried to keep everyone comfortable. But I was done being that girl. The truth is, once you see disrespect clearly, it never looks innocent again. Ethan sent messages that started out cold and then slowly turned desperate. At first, he said I had embarrassed his family. Then he said I had ruined our future. Then he said I had overreacted because his mother did not mean it that way. Not mean it that way. That phrase again. People love to hide behind intention when the damage is already done. I remember reading his texts at the kitchen table while my mother made tea beside me. She didn't ask me to answer him. She didn't tell me what to do. She just sat there, quiet and steady like she always had been. Finally, I looked up and said, "Mom, do you ever get tired of being the strong one?" She gave me this small, sad smile. "Every day," she said. That answer stayed with me, because the world usually only praises strong women when they are useful, when they are paying, when they are helping, when they are absorbing pain so everybody else can stay comfortable. But nobody talks enough about what strength costs. It costs sleep. It costs peace. It costs softness. It costs years of swallowing words you should have said out loud. And my mother had spent her whole life paying that price. I think that was the moment I understood the wedding was never really the biggest loss. the biggest loss had happened slowly, over years. Every time people accepted her help and then ignored her. Every time they took her kindness and called it normal. Every time they expected her to give more while giving her less. And now, at least, I was finally seeing it. A month later, Catherine showed up at my apartment. She did not call first. She just appeared, dressed perfectly, holding a handbag that probably cost more than my rent. I opened the door and stared at her for a second because I genuinely could not believe she had the nerve to come. Her expression was calm in that fake, polished way she always had. "Avery," she said like we were old friends. "May I come in?" I almost said no, but I let her in anyway. Maybe because I wanted to hear what she would say. Maybe because I wanted to see whether she had any shame left at all. She sat on my couch like she was trying not to sit on the wrong side of a room. Then she folded her hands and said, "I think everything got misunderstood at the wedding." I let out a slow breath. "No," I said. "Nothing was misunderstood." She blinked. I was trying to manage the event properly. I looked at her and said, "You were trying to put my mother in her place." Her jaw tightened. "That is not fair." "Really?" I said. "Then explain to me why the woman who paid for half of your son's wedding was told she could not sit in the front row." She leaned back slightly, like she was rehearsing her answer in real time. "Linda is very informal," she said carefully. "We just wanted the event to look polished." I nodded slowly. There it was, the truth hiding under all the pretty words. Not formal enough. Not polished enough. Not their kind of family. And because of that, she was supposed to stay invisible. I said, "My mother was polished enough when she was paying your bills, wasn't she?" Her face changed. Just a flicker. That was the first time I saw her lose her balance. She tried another route. "You humiliated Ethan in front of everyone," she said. I looked at her hard. "No," I said. "Your family humiliated itself." She didn't answer, so I continued. "You want to know what really happened? My mother gave you grace. I gave you patience. And you confused both of those things for weakness." The room went quiet. She looked at me for a long time, then said something I'll never forget. "If you had just cooperated, none of this would have happened." I smiled then, not because it was funny, because it was so honest in its cruelty. That was the whole problem in one sentence. If I had cooperated, if my mother had cooperated, if we had accepted being smaller, then they would have been comfortable. I stood up and said, "That is exactly why this ended." She stared at me as if she expected me to soften. I didn't. Finally, she got up, smoothed her blouse and said, "You have made your choice." "Yes," I said. "I have." She left without another word. And the minute the door closed, I realized I was shaking. Not because I was scared, because I had just faced someone who truly believed respect could be replaced with control. That night, I told my mother everything. She listened quietly, then sighed and said, "Some people only know how to value what they can display." I looked at her. She was staring into her tea like she had seen this kind of thing her whole life. And maybe she had. Maybe that was the saddest part. We spent the rest of the evening sitting together at the table, eating takeout and talking about nothing important. That was when I noticed something small but powerful. My mother laughed differently now. Not louder, just freer. Before, she had always laughed like she was checking whether everyone else was okay first. Now, she laughed like she was finally allowed to exist for herself. A few weeks after that, I heard through the grapevine that Ethan's family was furious. Not just because I pulled funding, not just because I left, but because other people had noticed. That mattered to them more than they would ever admit. They were not only upset that they had lost money, they were upset that they had been exposed. Because in their world, image mattered more than truth. And now the truth had slipped out. At the country club, at the bridal salons, through the group chats, through mutual friends, people started whispering about the mother who paid and was treated like staff. Nobody said it loudly in front of them, of course. People like that rarely get told the truth directly. But it spread. And I know it did, because one of Ethan's cousins eventually sent me a private message. It said, "For what it's worth, your mother didn't deserve that. I saw how your family was treated, and I'm sorry." I sat there staring at that message for a long time, because that was the thing about humiliation. People often see it more clearly after they are no longer afraid of the person causing it. The apology did not fix anything, but it confirmed what I already knew. I had not imagined it. It had really been that bad. And somehow, knowing that made it easier to breathe. My life changed after that. Not overnight. Not magically. There was no big, triumphant music in the background. There was no perfect healing montage. There was just life. Quiet, serious life. I went to work. I paid my own bills. I unpacked the last of the wedding gifts I decided to keep. I returned the ones that felt tied to a version of me I no longer wanted. And through all of it, my mother kept being my anchor. She never said, "I told you so." She never used the wedding as proof that she was right. She just loved me, the way she always had. One evening, months later, I found her sitting in the living room wearing a simple blue dress she had bought for herself. Not for a wedding, not for an occasion, just because she liked it. She looked beautiful. Not in the polished, expensive way Catherine liked to talk about. In the real way. The kind of beauty that comes from peace. I sat beside her and said, "You know, I think I spent too long trying to make everyone else comfortable." She smiled. "That's because you have a good heart." I shook my head. "That's not always a good thing." She turned to me then, very gentle, very sure, and said, "It is, but only if you learn where to place it." That line stayed with me, because that was the lesson. Not that kindness is bad. Not that giving is bad. Not that helping is bad. The lesson was that kindness without boundaries becomes a doorway for people who do not deserve access. And once they are in, they will take everything they can. Your money, your time, your energy, your silence, your dignity. They will take it all if you let them. But they do not get to keep it once you learn how to stand up. A year later, I told this story to a close friend of mine, and she looked at me with tears in her eyes. She said, "I wish more women understood that love without respect is not love." And she was right. Because what happened to my mother was not just a wedding problem. It was a life problem. A whole pattern of being useful but not honored. Needed but not valued. Tolerated but not embraced. And too many women know exactly what that feels like. They pay for the room. They prepare the table. They hold everything together. And then somebody else gets credit while they get pushed to the side. That day taught me that the most powerful thing a woman can do is refuse to continue funding her own humiliation. That is not revenge. That is self-respect. And there is a difference. Revenge wants to hurt people back. Self-respect simply removes access. That was what I did. I removed access. To my mother's money. To my patience. To my silence. To my willingness to pretend. And once I did, everything became clear. The people who mattered never asked me to shrink. They never asked my mother to disappear. They never told us to sit in the back while they stood in the front. That is how I know I made the right choice. Because love should never require you to accept disrespect as the price of belonging. A few days after that conversation with my mother, something happened that I did not expect. The wedding was over, the drama had settled, and I thought the worst part of my life was behind me. But life has a way of testing you one more time, just to see whether you really learned the lesson. I was at work when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. A woman's voice said, Avery, this is Megan from the wedding venue. My heart tightened. I remembered her. She had been kind, quiet, professional. One of the few people that day who never once looked at my mother like she didn't belong. Yes? I said. She hesitated before speaking. I probably should not be calling, she said, but I think you need to know something. I stepped into the empty hallway outside my office. My voice dropped. What is it? She took a breath and said, after the wedding, your mother came back to the venue to ask about a missing envelope she had left behind. While she was there, I overheard your former mother-in-law speaking to another guest. She was saying some very ugly things about your mother. Things about class. Things about where she came from. I closed my eyes. Even now, after everything, hearing that made my chest hurt. Megan continued. I just wanted you to know that not everyone there agreed with how your mother was treated. A few of us talked about it afterward. We were shocked. I thanked her. My voice was steady, but my hands were not. When the call ended, I stood there for a long time. Not because I was surprised, because I was tired. So tired of women like my mother being expected to accept humiliation in silence just so other people can protect their image. That evening, I went home and told my mother what Megan had said. She was sitting on the couch with her reading glasses on, looking through a stack of coupon flyers like she was comparing grocery prices. That was my mother. Always practical. Always grounded. When I finished, she simply nodded and said, people like that always say more when they think nobody important is listening. I looked at her. You're not angry? She smiled a little. I was angry, she said. That day, I knew what she meant. She had been angry in the way quiet women are angry, the kind of anger that does not scream, because it has already spent too many years surviving, the kind of anger that hides under calm words and tired eyes. I sat down beside her and leaned my head on her shoulder. We stayed that way for a while. Then I said, Mom, I owe you an apology. She turned to me. For what? For not standing up faster. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, you stood up when it mattered. But that was not enough for me, because I kept replaying the moment in my mind. The front row, the back entrance, the word staff, the way Ethan said nothing, the way Catherine smiled while she cut my mother down. I had stopped the money. I had walked out. I had ended the engagement. But some part of me still felt like I had arrived too late. My mother seemed to read my face. She always could. She reached over and touched my hand. Listen to me, she said. You did not fail me. Her voice was soft, but firm. You were raised to be polite. You were raised to keep peace. You were raised to believe people meant well until they proved otherwise. That is not failure. That is being a kind person in a cruel world. I blinked hard. She continued, but now you know better. So next time, you will move sooner. Next time, that word stayed with me. Because she was right. There would be a next time. Maybe not with a wedding. Maybe not with the same people. But life always brings you another room, another conversation, another test. And now I knew something I had not known before. You do not owe kindness to people who use it as permission. You do not owe peace to people who create chaos and then ask you to swallow it. And you do not owe silence to people who only respect you when your mouth is closed and your wallet is open. A week later, I got another message. This time it was from Ethan. I had not heard from him in days. The text said, can we talk? My mom says maybe things got misunderstood and I think you owe us a chance to fix this. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because he still didn't get it. He still thought the problem was a misunderstanding. He still thought there was something to fix. He still thought my mother was overreacting. He still thought respect could be negotiated after humiliation. I typed back one sentence. You don't get to hurt my mother and then ask me for another chance to pretend it didn't happen. I hit send, and then I blocked the number. No long speech. No final argument. No emotional paragraph. Just a boundary. That was new for me, and it felt strange at first. Almost rude. That is how deeply some women are trained to doubt themselves. Standing up can feel wrong when you are used to shrinking. But every time I felt that discomfort, I thought about my mother sitting in that front row after everything she had been through. I thought about how she had been treated like an inconvenience by people who depended on her money. I thought about how many times she had been expected to smile through disrespect, just to keep a room comfortable. And I knew then that discomfort was the price of change. A month later, my mother did something small that meant more to me than she will ever know. She opened her own savings account in her name only. Nothing fancy. No joint anything. Just her own money, in her own account, under her own control. She told me about it while we were eating dinner. I should have done this years ago, she said casually. I smiled. You deserve it. She shrugged. Maybe. And then she added, I used to think being needed was the same as being valued. Now I know better. That sentence hit me hard, because it was the truth at the center of everything. My mother had spent so many years being needed. Needed for bills, needed for rides, needed for help, needed for saving the day. But needed is not the same as cherished. Needed is not the same as respected. Needed can vanish the moment your usefulness ends. And too many people only realize that after they have already given too much. I watched my mother settle into her new life with small but powerful changes. She stopped apologizing for taking up space in stores and conversations in restaurants. She started buying herself nice coffee instead of pretending she did not care. She wore lipstick again. She got her hair done because she wanted to, not because she had somewhere important to be. And one afternoon, she walked into the living room wearing a deep green blouse and said, Do I look too dressed up for the grocery store? I looked at her and smiled. No, Mom. You look like yourself. She laughed. That laugh. That real easy laugh. It made me realize something else. The wedding had not only shown me who had failed to love us properly, it had also shown me how much life my mother had given up, just to make everyone else comfortable. And now, little by little, she was getting pieces of herself back. Meanwhile, Ethan and his family kept trying to rewrite history. They told people I had become emotional. They told people my mother had been sensitive. They told people the seating issue was miscommunicated. They told people I had acted impulsively because of wedding stress. It was all very neat, very tidy, very false. But here's the thing about false stories. They only work if the people around them are too polite to question them. And some people did question them. A woman from Ethan's extended family eventually reached out to my mother directly. She said she had been at the reception and had seen enough to know the truth. She apologized. Not because an apology could fix it, but because she wanted to be on the right side of what happened. My mother accepted it with grace. Of course she did. That was who she was. She never used her pain as a weapon. She only used it as a lesson. And that lesson spread farther than I expected. A friend of mine told me later that she had shared my story with her sister, who had been paying for her own daughter's engagement party while being treated like an outsider by her future in-laws. She said my story helped her sister stop funding the entire thing until they all agreed to treat her with respect. That made me cry, because that was the point. Not just my pain, not just my ending. The point was that women like my mother should never have to buy a seat at a table where they are being insulted. Respect should not be rented with sacrifice. It should be given freely. A year passed, then another, and slowly, the sting of that wedding turned into something else. Not forgiveness. Not exactly. More like wisdom. The kind that settles into your bones and changes the way you move through the world. I became more careful with my kindness. Not colder, just clearer. I stopped saying yes too quickly. I stopped explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. I stopped rescuing situations that were only hurting me in return. And my mother? She bloomed. That is the best word I have for it. She bloomed. She took a trip with her sister to the coast. She joined a book club. She started volunteering at a shelter on weekends. She made friends again. Real friends. People who called her because they liked her, not because they needed something. One day, she came home with a little silver bracelet she had bought herself. I asked her what the occasion was. She held it up and smiled. No occasion, she said. I just liked it. That sentence made me laugh, but it also made me emotional. Because for so many years, my mother only bought things when they were practical, or necessary, or for someone else. Now she was buying joy, little by little, and she was not waiting for permission anymore. That changed me too. I used to think strength meant holding everything together. Now I think strength is knowing when to let go of what keeps breaking you. I used to think family meant forgiving whatever hurt came from inside the circle. Now I know family without respect is just familiarity wearing perfume. And I used to think love was proven by how much you were willing to give. Now I know love is also proven by what you refuse to tolerate. That wedding taught me all of that in the most painful way possible. But sometimes pain is the only language people like that understand. Not because we want it to be, because they leave us no softer option. I still remember one final detail from that day. It was after the ceremony, after I had left the reception, after the whole thing had collapsed into awkward silence and forced smiles. My mother told me something while we were sitting in the car. She said, I used to think if I gave enough, people would eventually be kind. I turned to her, and now, she looked out the window for a moment. Now I know some people take kindness as proof that they can ask for more. I held her hand tighter. That was the sentence that explained everything. Why the front row mattered. Why the back entrance mattered. Why the word staff mattered. Why I pulled the money. Why I walked away. Because once someone shows you they only value what you can provide, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is stop providing it. And that is not cruelty. That is clarity. So now, when I tell this story, I do not tell it as a wedding disaster. I tell it as a turning point. A moment when a daughter learned that her mother's sacrifice was not decoration. It was not background. It was not something to be used and then hidden. It was the foundation, and foundations deserve respect. My mother built the day. My mother paid for the dream. My mother gave so much of herself that there should never have been a question about where she sat. But there was. And because there was, I learned who I was. I was the daughter who would not keep quiet. I was the woman who would not let her mother be treated like staff. I was the person who would rather lose the event than lose the truth. And in the end, that choice gave us something better than a perfect wedding. It gave us peace. It gave us freedom. It gave us self-respect. And that, to me, is worth more than any reception hall, any designer flowers, any expensive cake, any fake family smile. Because a beautiful day means nothing if the people who love you most are made to feel small inside it. And I will never let that happen again. I will never forget the way my mother looked at me when I chose her dignity over the wedding. That look told me everything. Not just that she was proud, but that she finally felt seen. And when a mother who has given everything finally feels seen, that is a victory no one can take away. That was the real ending. Not the ceremony. Not the guests. Not the money. The real ending was the moment I realized that love without respect is just a debt someone else expects you to keep paying. And I stopped paying. The story ends there. with no front row reserved for cruelty, with no back entrance for the woman who made it all possible, with no more silence, only dignity, only truth, only the strong, quiet, beautiful bond between a mother and daughter who finally understood that some doors are worth walking out of. Because once you leave a room that only values what you bring and not who you are not losing anything. A few years later, I understood something even deeper than what happened at the wedding. It was not just about money. It was not just about the front row. It was about what happens when people see your love as something they are entitled to use. That is the part that stayed with me. Because the wedding was only one day, but the attitude behind it had been there all along. The small comments, the polite smiles that felt cold, the way Catherine always seemed to measure a person by what they could offer, and the way Ethan never truly stood between that cruelty and the people it hurt. That was the real betrayal, not the ceremony, not the seating chart, not even the public embarrassment. It was the quiet permission. The kind of permission that says, "You can go ahead and disrespect her. I will not stop you." That kind of silence can break a heart in ways loud fights never can. I think that is why my mother's strength affected me so much. She had lived through so much already. My father leaving, long work hours, bills that never stopped, years of putting everyone else first. And yet she still showed up with grace. She still paid for things she did not owe. She still gave from her savings. She still tried to make my wedding beautiful, even after being treated like she was invisible. That is not weakness. That is a powerful kind of love. The kind that deserves honor, not abuse. One evening, I was helping my mother clean out an old box of papers when I found the receipt folder from the wedding. She had kept everything. Every deposit, every transfer, every confirmation. I looked at the stack and felt my chest tighten. "Why did you keep all this?" I asked. She smiled a little. "Because I wanted to remember what I gave," she said. That answer stayed with me. Not because it was sad, because it was honest. She wanted to remember, not to punish anyone, not to relive the pain, just to never let herself forget how much she had poured into something that had not valued her enough. I think a lot of women do that without saying it out loud. They keep the proof, the messages, the receipts, the emotional memory, not because they are bitter, because they have learned that if they do not keep the truth, someone else will rewrite it. And the rewriting is always worse. The rewriting says, "It was not that bad." The rewriting says, "You took it too personally." The rewriting says, "You should have been more understanding." No, sometimes it was that bad. Sometimes it was personal. Sometimes understanding is exactly what let the wrong people keep going for too long. That is what the wedding taught me. Not to be hard, just to be clear. There is a difference. A few months after that, my mother and I were invited to a family gathering on my side. It was a small thing. Nothing fancy. Just a barbecue in a cousin's backyard. But I noticed something right away. People made space for my mother. Not because they were afraid of her. Not because she was paying for anything. Because they respected her. They asked her where she wanted to sit. They made her a plate before she had to ask. They listened when she spoke. And that simple kindness brought tears to my eyes more than I expected. Because after everything, it felt almost unreal. Like watching someone breathe after holding their breath for too long. My mother noticed my reaction and touched my arm. "See?" she said quietly. "This is how it should feel." I looked at her. She smiled. "No tension," she said. "No proving. No shrinking." That night, I realized how much emotional damage I had normalized for years. I had become so used to bracing myself in certain rooms that peace felt strange at first. That is what bad treatment does. It trains your nervous system to expect disrespect. It makes you think discomfort is normal. It makes you believe you should be grateful for crumbs. But you should not. You deserve more than crumbs. Your mother deserves more than crumbs. Any woman who gives love, time, money, and care deserves to be treated like she matters without having to purchase the privilege. I wish more people understood that, especially in families, especially around weddings, because weddings reveal what people really believe. They reveal who sees value in the person and who only sees value in the transaction. For Catherine, my mother was useful until she asked for dignity. For Ethan, loyalty was easy until loyalty required courage. For the rest of them, appearances mattered more than decency. That is why I walked away. And I would do it again. Not because I was trying to make a statement, but because I was finally living one. Years later, when people ask me whether I regret not staying, I tell them the truth. I regret the pain my mother went through. I regret the months of stress. I regret how long it took me to see the pattern clearly. But I do not regret leaving, because leaving taught me something priceless. It taught me that the right room does not make you earn your place by suffering. The right people do not require you to be humiliated before you are welcomed. The right family does not need to be convinced that your mother deserves a seat in the front row. That should be automatic. That should be basic. That should be the minimum. And when the minimum is missing, everything else is just decoration. My mother has changed so much since then. She still works hard, but now she rests too. She still gives, but now she gives with limits. She still loves, but not at the cost of her dignity. And that to me is the most beautiful transformation of all. One day, while we were shopping, she picked up a pair of expensive shoes, looked at the price tag, and laughed. "What?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nothing," she said. "I just used to think things like this were for other people." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Not anymore," I said. She smiled. "No," she said softly. "Not anymore." That was the moment I knew the wound had started to close. Not because the memory was gone. Not because what happened was erased.